All right. So it is the new year. It is January 1st. We did our year in review 2022 show. Now we're going to start out with 10 predictions for 2023. So, Russell, your first is a fairly easy one, or so we think anyway. Here we go. You're up.
Ron DeSantis is going to run for president. My bolder prediction, which I've been making for, I don't know, about a year now. About a year.
We'll say that. I'll give you that. I mean, it's probably more like 6 months, but we can round up in the spirit of the holidays.
Yeah, we're going to round up in the spirit of the holidays. DeSantis is going to be the next president. I'm going that far, but obviously that wouldn't be this year. So if we're talking about this year, he's going to announce that he's running for president. He's not. It's his time. It's his time, and he knows. When you just wait on these things, you never know if it's going to be your time in 4 years.
Right. That's why Obama
the iron
ran.
Is hot. He's got the momentum. Boom. He's going to go.
Obama ran in 2008 knowing it was a long shot, right? Yep. Knowing he was going to run against the former first lady, senator of New York, right? She had all the money, all the party, right? But he's like, you know what? In 4 years, I'm not going to be the hot new kid on the block. I got to do it now. And he did, and he won.
DeSantis is coming out of being the only person to come out of those midterms victorious on the Republican side. It's his time. This is his moment. And he's a smart guy. He knows that. He's not going to let it go by.
All right, well, here's who else thinks it's his time. Here's my first prediction. Joe Biden is going to seek re-election. And my prediction is that he will announce by April, and he might even announce to his inner circle, meaning, not just his advisors, but like the actual DNC. He might make it clear as early as a couple weeks from now. I think you will know for sure that he's running if by February other candidates have not entered the race. Because by this time, 2019, you already had a handful of Democrats saying they're running. And so if you don't see candidates announcing, within the next 6 to 8 weeks, that means he's in. Now, he might announce then just to try and shove people out of his way, or he might just sort of send that message sort of internally. But either way, I think you're going to have a formal announcement that he is officially seeking re-election by April at the latest. So I think he's running, and I think he will make that known pretty soon, and I think he will be the nominee. I don't think anybody has a chance to knock him out.
Okay,
I'm gonna. As that sounds, I think that's true. I'm not saying I want that to be true.
I don't think anybody will really try who has the stature to have a chance at it, because there's nobody with that stature who has that kind of independence. There are no more Bernie. Even Bernie Sanders is not Bernie Sanders anymore.
No, and he's already said he wouldn't challenge Biden. There have been chirps that Marianne Williamson is thinking about challenging him. People have made videos about that to get a lot of clicks.
She doesn't have the stature to have a shot. So nobody who would have a snowball's chance in hell is going to try to do it.
I don't even think she's going to try, really. I mean, I will believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when she announces that she's actually going to challenge it.
She definitely doesn't need that kind of grief from the corporate media. She doesn't need to get musked by those people.
Right.
Which is exactly what they're going to do. They'll give her the Taibbi treatment. Now you're a dangerous kook. Ooh, right. I'm gonna tack on a little sub prediction to your prediction related to my prediction, which goes back to why I've been so confident that DeSantis is going to be the next president. Joe Biden, his cognitive decline in this campaign is going to be so painful that even the corporate media cannot talk around it, really. It's going to be, he didn't really have to campaign last time. And when he did, before COVID got serious, he hardly appeared anywhere without it being an incident, without it being something his spokespeople had to deal with. Can you imagine what he's going to be like in a real campaign 4 years older?
Right.
So my prediction is DeSantis knocks out Trump. Trump is much weaker than people realized. Now they're starting to realize. At first, they thought he was invincible. He wasn't invincible. He ran against Hillary Clinton. That's all it was. DeSantis knocks him out, and then he's running against the Pepperidge Farm guy with Alzheimer's.
Right.
Boom.
Yeah.
Who's going to vote for that?
The Biden record is pretty awful.
Right. No, he's not popular. He's not accomplished. And DeSantis reads like a competent manager, which after all of this, the chaos of Trump, the dementia of Biden, that's going to look very appealing to a lot of those suburban libs who voted for Biden against Trump.
Right. All right, you're up.
All right. My prediction, you're seeing a lot of predictions of economic catastrophe next year, but that is as much a genre as attacking left hosts on YouTube for clicks and cash. That's a whole thing. Like there are people who make a whole living out of constantly scaring the shit out of people about how they have to pull their money out of American banks tomorrow and buy gold. Conservative sites particularly feed off that trough. I'm gonna go the other way. I believe inflation is going to pull back next year. And the Fed has fucked a lot of very rich people this year, which is not their habit. It took inflation that serious for the Fed to show any independence from the endless greed of the upper classes who hold most of the financial assets. They're not going to keep on that course 1 second longer than they have to. They're getting a lot. They're getting an earful. It's hard for Powell to go out to dinner these days, I'm sure. As soon as that inflation starts to pull back, Powell is going to reverse course. First, he's going to stop with the interest rate hikes. That in and of itself is going to shoot the stock market to the moon. Because I've never seen this in my life where the market, it is a bear market. I've just never seen a real one except for 2008, where for an entire year, it's just over a year. Really since like November 2021. That was when it started to tank. And it's been unrelenting. Like any bounce has been very shallow, and then the selling has resumed. So you could definitely make the argument that a lot of these companies, like real companies, not the fly-by-night ones, companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, you could definitely argue that the NVIDIA, that a lot of these tech companies have been way, way oversold. As soon as Powell stops hiking interest rates, the stock market's going to go through the roof. He starts actually reversing his policy, which I think he probably will by the end of the year, as long as inflation remains manageable. Forget about it. I mean, there are certain stocks that will go up more than 100% this year, if I'm right about that. Now, let me make something clear. I am not suggesting that there will not be a recession and job loss as a result of all these interest rate hikes. That's what's going to pull the inflation back. That was always the intention. As we saw during COVID, Wall Street and the real economy no longer have anything to do with each other. Once Powell starts to pull back on those interest rates or stop these hikes, all this cash that's sitting on the side, believe as much as these people lost in the market this year, they got plenty of money on the sidelines to throw in. They're all going to pile in to catch the bottom. And when they do, the market's going to go off the hook. You're also going to have all those Robinhood people who got out now are going to run back in. They're also going to want to catch the bottom. So basically, as soon as he stops raising interest rates, you're going to have a speculative frenzy. And it's not going to matter if people have been thrown out of work and business is slow and consumer confidence is in the toilet. The stock market's still going to rocket. So my prediction would be recession next year and a booming stock market at the same time.
All right. Well said. I'll take your word for it. I don't know nothing about no stock market. My prediction is that SCOTUS is going to strike down Joe Biden's student debt cancellation executive order. And I don't know. One thing I don't know is how exactly Biden will respond, because I think if he was going to challenge it, if he was going to change the justification for it, which would be under the basically what he used was a COVID emergency sort of measure to try and justify student debt cancellation rather than just going through the Higher Education Act. Pardon me. If he was going to try and redo his case, you'd think that they would have just made that more sound argument in the first place, right? It seems like this was set up to fail, which means how does he handle it if this was set up to fail? Does he just take the loss and say, oh, do a sort of, Senate parliamentarian thing? Well, we tried. Sorry. Or does he just keep extending the moratorium on payments? He can extend the moratorium on payments, but come 2024, he's going to have to shit or get off the pot before people vote for either Biden or DeSantis, right? He's going to have to take a final stance on that. He's not just going to be able to kick the can down the road indefinitely. My prediction is they're going to screw the students over because it seemed like it was a device used to gin up turnout, in a midterm where the Democrats don't have a Republican boogeyman on the ballot that is their own sort of turnout machine. If there is no Republican boogeyman on the ballot, then you need something to drive that. With DeSantis or Trump, this odious figurehead at the top of the race, right? At that point, they will have their turnout machine. They'll trust that the young people will turn out to stop DeSantis or to stop Trump. Right. So they can screw them as much as they want.
Abortion, right? Abortion.
Right, exactly.
Row.
They'll have something else. It'll be something else. Oh, yeah, student debt. Yeah, we tried. Couldn't get it.
I mean, he can't really restart student loan payments before the vote in November. He can't. He just can't. So he could try another tactic, possibly. He could actually try to do it the way he should have done it in the first place. Maybe. Just because he is going to be going into an election.
I don't think so, man. I think they're going to let it go. I think that's going to be hard to do. How do you restart this is the Democrats, I'll grant you that. But how do you restart student loan payments going into an election year? Well, they're set to expire at the end of June, right? So if the moratorium expires
the way we do elections, that's going into an election year.
Yeah, maybe. You may be right. But I just don't know. I don't know. I'm thinking they're going to have to take a final stance on this before November 2024.
I think they're going to have to come up with some other way to pussyfoot around canceling it.
All right.
That I think they're going to need to be dangling that going into the election.
All right. Well, we will see. That's one that will have to hang in the air, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
All right. You have your next prediction up here.
Russia can't keep this going forever. And the fact that you've had Putin kind of gingerly broaching the idea of talks suggests to me that he's looking for an exit ramp. The West does not want an exit ramp. So my prediction is not based on Putin wanting it. He wants to get out of this already. War is good for business up to a point. After a while, it's just too destructive and disruptive to a lot of non-defense contract kinds of businesses to just keep a war going in the heart of Europe like this. So I think the West is going to start to soften its stance about talks. They just cannot let a war go on in Europe like this forever. I think the West is Putin is going to be highly motivated, and the West is going to start to feel like they sucked as much blood out of this bloated carcass as they should, without causing too much damage to other sources of profit and revenue. And as a result, you get a ceasefire sometime over the summer, if not a little bit before.
Well, I mean, I certainly hope you are right about that. It's tough to say. I mean, look, one of the things I wrote a recent article about this, which is that, this war, support for this war in America is entirely a function of PR, right? I mean, it's a marketing department thing.
Sure.
I mean, they can't really sell the people. They all are, but this one especially
Incubator
because there's
babies.
Not even the guise of national interest here, really. I mean, you can't even really sell people on the idea that there is an urgent national interest of ours in Ukraine. And so this is going to become an election issue also, don't forget. It's one thing to be writing these checks, signing all this money away when you don't have a Republican opponent sort of asking, hey, why? And the
Is
opposition to
DeSantis
this
going to ask
war,
why, though?
well, I think he will. I actually do.
Yeah.
My hunch is that, if he's smart, he will. Now, if what you're saying is true, it might be a moot. It might be, a moot point. Certainly hope that that's the case. I couldn't really predict that either way, but certainly hope you're right. Speaking of DeSantis and Trump, I believe that the Republican Civil War is going to flame out. I think McCarthy will find the votes to be Speaker of the House. He's struggling now. But I think that the Republicans will, over the course of this year, sort of find their footing. And I don't think that this, coming apart of the GOP is actually going to happen, because I think Trump's stock is plunging so quickly that now there was a new poll that came out that said a majority of Republican voters don't want him to run again. And so what that means is that, to the extent that one man's ego can tear down an entire party, there's always a chance. But, what do we always say? Republicans want to win. They want to win. And what's in their best interest is victory. And I think they're going to do what is in their, what ultimately they feel is in the interest of beating Joe Biden. And I think that they are going to find a way to do that. I think the leadership probably survives, right? Just because I don't think they're going to want to make that a key focus this year, trying to tear down McConnell, right? Tear down, the top brass in the House, So I don't think you're going to see the kind of like Tea Party momentum that we saw in 2009, where a lot of the top GOPers got torn down and taken away.
Right.
I think they're going to focus on trying to win back some of those normies who they lost in 2020 and then again in 2022. And so I think the Civil War that's being hyped up is a little bit overblown. I think it might get nasty for a little while here, as there is sort of a sort of jockeying for sort of top spot in the Republican primary field heading into 2024. But I think the more consistently DeSantis sort of establishes himself, as front runner, I think you will see that sort of Civil War fervor start to calm down.
I agree. I think DeSantis ultimately is their Glenn Youngkin candidate, a less boring, more charismatic Glenn Youngkin who can actually be run for president. And I think at that time, this is kind of a sub prediction that I was intimating when we were talking about the Stanford list. Woke culture has peaked. I think once you have somebody who's not Donald Trump as the spokesperson for that side of the culture war, you're going to see very quickly how little support it really has. Once you have somebody who's not as odious as Donald Trump representing the other side.
Yeah, I think that is very well put. All right, moving on. Oh, that's sad.
Poor Mickey.
Man, poor Mickey Mouse.
Well, and what I was just saying leads into this. Disney was really fucked in the 70s and 80s. People forget this now. There was a long period where Disney really couldn't figure out what it was and where it fit into the culture. The post 60s culture just didn't fit with Mickey Mouse and Snow White, right? It just they couldn't quite figure out what they were. So they started Touchstone, which they had some success with, starting to make films for adults. It was a big deal when they did that. It was very controversial for Disney to make any film like cursing in it or anything like that to come out of Disney Studios. And Eisner really expanded the brand and changed it. And then under Iger, who's just returned as CEO, they went on a buying spree. Instead of creating their own intellectual property as they did during this golden age you had under Eisner, where you had The Little Mermaid, where you had Beauty and the Beast, where you had this new wave of animated classics to match the old ones that had been done under Walt Disney, Dumbo and Snow White. You had this, like, Disney's animation during this period mostly was just re-releases of their old stuff. I mean, the 70s and 80s. And then the 90s, and late 80s, there's this whole new wave of Disney classics, what we now consider classics, Lion King, all of these films. But then they stopped creating their own popular IPs in favor of buying everybody else's. So they bought Marvel, they went and bought Lucasfilm, and they've leaned very heavily into that content. At the same time, the company seems to have been overrun by social justice warriors who don't really have any particular artistic talent. And for some inexplicable reason, they've been put in charge of a lot of banner projects at Walt Disney. This has gradually been eroding the brand image, and it's been eroding its brand loyalty. Now, if you look at the numbers that have resulted from that, they're pretty disastrous. Disney is spending $2 for every dollar in revenue that it's taking in on Disney Plus, on its streaming service. Their theme parks, and this is Iger's fault. They got really greedy. It used to cost $125 to go to the park. Now you have to pay that for each individual park to visit Disney World. So there are 5 parks. You have to you have to pay again for each one.
A la carte, yeah.
Yeah, you have to pay a la carte. It didn't used to be that way. That's really just ripping off the parents, really going overboard. And they're making content that really is not family friendly in the interest of politics. Now, I'm not taking a moral stand on some of these issues, but Strange World really illustrated it. They really touted in the marketing that it's a breakthrough in representation because it's a family. And one of the teenage son is gay. I don't have an issue with that, but from a business perspective, that was a very bad idea. And this is winding up losing. It's going to be one of the biggest bombs in animation history. Look, there are a lot of parents who don't want to take their 5-year-old to a movie that has that element in it. Even if they don't necessarily consider themselves anti-gay or homophobic, they might not want to have that discussion with their 5-year-old. Right? And there are a lot of people like that. Taking on Ron DeSantis on the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, which we covered a while back. That bill is actually very popular, and its overall thrust is you can't discuss sex, sexuality, and gender with children from nursery school through, I think it's 3rd grade. If you think you live in a country where that's not a popular position, and you're basing the way that you're writing entertainment for children and families on the assumption that you live in that country, it's not surprising that Disney is struggling now, that all of its content is struggling. And now it's not, we talked a little bit about this offline, and we'll get into it more probably in the film club. I watched Maverick last night, which was the big hit of the year, right? Which a lot of people are pointing to that and saying, look, people will still go to the movies. They just don't like this shit that you're cranking out. It's not that Maverick was diverse. One of the prominent characters was a female pilot. That's one of the why I don't want to spoil it, but she was a very prominent character in it. But she never gave a speech about how men catcall her on the street.
Right.
There's the thing. It's not that you can't have these themes. We've had these themes for a very long time. I'll give you a good example within the sci-fi fantasy genre. Battlestar Galactica, I don't know, this is maybe 15 years ago now, took the whole bad boy pilot thing and gender switched it. Had a female character who was that character, who was the Tom Cruise Maverick character, who was the badass pilot, right down to the sleeping around. But you know what? It was just built into the story. It was part of the story. They never gave a speech. The feminism was built in. It was built into casting it that way. But they didn't use that as a substitute for quality writing, acting, and directing. They didn't expect the audience to fall all over themselves to praise it simply because of that element.
Right.
They understood it had to be good.
Right, of course. Yeah, and those
That
themes
is the
that are
problem.
worked in are subtext. That's where
It's
that's when
subtext.
storytelling works, is when it's subtext, not when it's text. Yeah.
Well, and that's how you persuade people. That's how you don't get any backlash against your message when you've told the story so well. People love the character.
Right, exactly.
Right, and they're not going to attack it. And the same exact kind of dorks who went crazy about She-Hulk, I promise you, to a person, they love Battlestar Galactica. To a person. You won't find one of those people who does not love Battlestar Galactica. So my thesis, and Disney is at Disney, I've watched it over the years. Its stock never goes below the low 80s. That's like the bottom for Disney stock. The stock has been sitting there and it hasn't really been able to get off it for a really long time. Like it hasn't rebounded. I think Disney is in a similar position to where it was in the 70s and 80s. They fucked up Star Wars. They fucked up Marvel. And they can't easily manage that financially because they put so many of their eggs in those two baskets. Their animation department has been overrun by whack jobs so that they're not able to make anything that's not some kind of a cultural statement that parents really aren't interested in bringing their children to. I think it's going to be a long, cold winter for Disney. And I think this is going to be the year that it really enters a new phase of, it's like an overextended empire. That empire is about to collapse. I see Disney stock going into the 50s, maybe the 40s.
All right. Well, coming down the home stretch here, one of my final predictions here is that the House investigations are mostly a flop. Now, don't mistake that for me saying that they will not uncover anything of substance when they investigate Hunter Biden or Fauci or any of the big tech stuff that they are sort of hinting that they are going to look into. I just think the country is so polarized right now that it's not going to move polls that much. Because when you talked about in your in inflation pick there, you mentioned how there is this real disconnect between the stock market and the economy. Pardon me. Should not have picked the day when the plague to hit my house to only have one 12-ounce can of seltzer. Really
should have made yourself a hot toddy.
I should have made a hot tea or at least a big jug of water.
Those fucking things are magic. Yeah. Hot toddies are magic. The Irish know their shit, man.
Yeah, no, that's true.
That's true. Hot whiskey with some cloves, little cinnamon,
delicious. But yeah, just as the stock market doesn't signal how the everyday person is doing, I think the sort of electoral outcomes that we're seeing now do not signal the general mood of the country, because I think so many people have fallen victim to despair, right? And they have just sort of thrown their hands up and said, fuck this, right? And so in that sense, I do think, yeah, they're going to make some findings there. They will be important in that way. Will they move polls? No. I think we had a status quo year in 2022. I think 2023 is going to be another status quo year. That's not a hell of a pitch for the podcast. Hey, this is going to be a really boring, depressing year politically, everybody. Make sure you tune in every 3 days to hear what we have to say about it, right? But,
that's why we're doing the film club.
It's exactly right. That's why we started the movie club, right? So something else to talk about. But that's what I think. I think they will make some noise. It'll make the rounds in certain media circles, Fox News, obviously, and online, right? People will talk about it online. Will that manifest itself in electoral outcomes in the off-year races in November? I doubt it. I think the normies have really sort of monopolized that space, and sort of really taken it for them and their kind, I don't see there being a revolution at the ballot box in November based on anything that the House looks into over the, late winter, spring, and summer.
Well, that's the thing. It's the same thing that happened with January 6th. You only convince the convinced.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. All righty. So let's do it. We got one more per person here. Your final prediction here. Twitter survives. Tesla, however, ends up being the venture that becomes a thorn in the side of Elon Musk.
It's already happening. He can't really walk away from Twitter. He owes billions of dollars on it. And I also think it's such a vanity project for him. I just don't think he'll concede defeat. He enjoys the cultural power this gives him too much. It might make business sense. You know, there's a saying in the investment world, it's never too late to walk away from a bad investment. Twitter is probably a bad investment. And on that basis, he should probably walk away from it. I don't think he will, at least not this year. But I don't know if he really thought through who his customers are, and that if the corporate media turned him into Donald Trump, which it has. This morning on my newsfeed, I'm reading an article where a cultural historian is talking about narcissistic men and the role they play in our culture, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Sam Bankman-Fried, not really looking at the fact that those are three very different personalities, actually.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Actually, but no, there are enemies. They're all Nazis. They're all. That's the level of subtlety of this cultural historian. You can wipe your ass with wherever she got that fucking degree. The libs buy Teslas. And
yeah, of course.
You know, at first when he took over Twitter, my first thought was, if there's anything that could get Republicans to buy Teslas, it's going to be this. But Ford already owns their asses. GM already owns their asses. They're not Teslas. That would be like if Nancy Pelosi suddenly became conservative. You still couldn't get them to vote for Nancy Pelosi. The brand is just too tarnished.
Well, the other part of it is, you know, you mentioned this in the past, you know, and this perhaps applies to more of the sort of super rich than the rank and file shitlib. But like for a guy like Rob Reiner, right, it's a lot easier to trade in his car for another car. If you want to virtue signal with what car you drive, you trade in one EV for a Ford EV, right?
Right, that's it.
You can't trade in 10 million followers or however many followers he has, right? Right? You can't take that to Mastodon. That's Twitter exclusive, man. And so to give that up would cost something. And as you mentioned in the past, you actually put it very well. These people are into cost-free virtue signaling, not just virtue signaling that costs them nothing, right? What's a
That's
Tesla
why they're all
Rob
still
Reiner?
on Twitter.
He trades it in for another one, right? Exactly. That's why they're all still there.
Yeah, no, they're all getting, all the Hollywood celebrities, they're all getting rid of their Teslas now.
Right.
And that is going to kill Tesla, because as they go, so goes their customer base. The people who take Rob Reiner seriously are the customers for Tesla.
Exactly.
And EVs are the future, but Ford has such a head start with that market, with the Fox market that's going to start buying EVs. They're not going to buy a Tesla. They're going to buy the brand that they trust. If they're already going to get a non-gas powered vehicle, it's going to be a Ford or a GM.
Right. Exactly. All right. One more here. This is my prediction, and I hinted at this when we did the Jordan Chariton segment, whereas what I said in that segment, because we're going to clip these separately, so in case anybody's watching one and not the other, as progressive goals become more abstract, the only tangible winnable battles become these civil libertarian fights, right? Speech, bodily autonomy, things like that. And for that reason, I am predicting maybe not a massive yellow wave, but a certain yellow wave. I am predicting that libertarianism has a big year. I think it makes a resurgence. I think people are going to think a lot more highly of this at the end of this year than they do now, for precisely the reasons I got into in our last segment, but I'll say them here once more. If you're on the left, right, and I'm not saying everybody on the left becomes a libertarian thinker. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is the battles that are actually being fought now, that are actually winnable now, like free speech online, right? And like I said, they're being fought in a very imperfect way by very imperfect people. But those are actually battles that are happening where there is significant momentum towards making the internet a freer space. I'm not just talking about Elon Musk. I'm talking about spaces like Rumble, right? Substack, right? A free speech thing, which we are obviously on as well. Those are examples of fights that you can actually win, as opposed to Medicare for all. So it's not that like progressives are becoming less progressive. It's just that those goals are not winnable anymore. So you got to go where the fight is. And I think people are going to, like I said, give the sort of libertarian ideology a second look. Not that they will subscribe to it outright, but I think a lot more people are going to have a favorable view. If you took like a very sort of like standard, like, Harvard University poll, right? What are your attitudes towards socialism, communism, libertarianism, conservatism? Right. I think the libertarian bounce is going to be noticeable at the end of the year. Partly for the reasons I just said, but it's not just left-wing people. I think a lot of establishment narratives are just crumbling. I think faith in institutions will continue to crumble. Like I said, there is that gap between that kind of attitude, between a collapsing society and a stabilizing electoral process. There's that sort of disconnect where the reality on the ground is not necessarily going to reflect itself in the composition on not just Capitol Hill, but state houses, right? All these things. I think there's going to be a real sort of gap there, but I think a lot more people are just going to become a lot more distrustful of institutions, of the quote-unquote administrative state, right? That's the whole thing. And I think, I think it's going to be a big year for the, what's his name here? The Gadsden flag. I think those flag sales might get a bounce by the end of the year.
I agree for all the reasons you're saying. One, people are increasingly going to see these as the only winnable battles. And also, the more odious the government becomes, the more sympathetic to a libertarian argument of keeping your money and applying it the way that you want, the more appeal that's going to have to a broader political spectrum.
Right, exactly.
Once you decide the government can't do Medicare for all, well, maybe we need to pay less taxes and start insurance co-ops.
Right. Exactly. And, that even manifests itself in a certain labor movement, right? Not that, obviously, we think of the labor movement as the home of sort of, I won't even say socialism in this country, but it's a left thing. Really, extracting money, extracting capital from capital, extracting wages from management, that's not necessarily a person versus state endeavor, right? I mean, that doesn't necessarily contradict any of the tenets of civil libertarianism. It is workers, taking the reins themselves, taking the battle directly to the boss. That's really what I mean, is that you're not involving the state in that process, right? So what if AOC doesn't show up? Who cares? They could win. As Chris Smalls proved, they could win anyway.
That's what I found intellectually inconsistent about Ayn Rand's philosophy. We, of course, on the left, she's the great evil. But hey, she had some interesting and valid ideas about money and wealth and ingenuity and its relation to wealth generation in a capitalist society. I think she was missing a lot, but where her whole thing fell apart, where I felt she had no credibility when I read her work, because there's a lot of people, if you read Ayn Rand when you're young, you're reading it, and you're like, shit, this makes a lot of sense. Where it all fell apart for me was the way that she portrayed unions and union organizers. You spend all of this time, and I'm talking specifically about Atlas Shrugged, you spend all this time arguing that the way capitalism should work is a raw battle of people fighting to get the most capital they can for what they have to contribute.
Right, exactly.
So isn't that by definition what a union does?
Exactly.
Why is it heroic
it's not a threat
when
to
this individualist inventor does it?
Right.
But they're thieves when the unions do it.
Right.
That's a woman who was traumatized by communism. You see that a lot with the most extreme anti-socialist people. Very often they're escapees from communist countries who just can't distinguish between socialized medicine and the gulag. They just, to them, as soon as you're not paying for the doctor, that's it.
Right.
Stalin is coming for you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm very happy that you mentioned that, because I don't want people to get the impression that we are going to turn libertarian, right? We're not. But I'm just saying it's a matter of prioritizing where you can find wins and where you can't. Right. Because the vision that's being expressed now by mainstream figures, really in both parties, especially the Democrats, though, is that there are no discussions to be had, right? There are no possibilities. There are no new frontiers to explore. They have really, truly become, I've called them this in the past, the end of history party. Well, this is it. This is it. That's really what Obama was, right? We've elected a biracial, neoliberal scumbag who's going to serve the banks, but who is going to give off the impression that because he could rise to the presidency, anything is possible. And there you have it. There you have it. Progress ends there. Oh, that wasn't oh, no, Donald Trump. Oh, boy. Yeah. Who do we put in?
Racists.
Right? Joe Biden, right? Every president now will be in the mold of him.
Who's done more to hurt people of color, arguably, than any living politician.
Right. But, I mean, what Biden really... Well, yes, obviously. But he really is the perfect successor in this sort of timeline of Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, because Biden is just, okay, now we're just going to flatline. We're just going to ride this straight as long as it will go. And that's really what they have in mind.
We'll see you're racist, and we'll raise you our own racist.
Right, exactly. And there's just a lack of curiosity at the heart of it all, right? I mean, that's the thing that's really depressing about modern libs and modern Democrats, is just there is not a desire to explore the possibilities of the world, right? That's why they don't value speech. That's why they don't care about free speech, because they have nothing to talk about. Right? They have nothing to offer to the conversation, even if this is all an abstraction and we're all just jerking off on YouTube watching people talk shit about stuff that's never going to happen. Wouldn't you rather do that than not? Right? Doesn't it just sort of tickle your brain the right way to have these conversations, even if that's all they are? But they don't even want to have these conversations. They don't want to think about it. They want to shut these conversations down. And people are going to reject that. People are more curious than that, right? They are not in the majority in that way. They may be the majority of the voting public, but that's why I'm saying look for maybe a small one, maybe not a seismic one, but look for a yellow wave in 2023.
Please clap.